OK, well, next up on the campaign trail, where we have interviews with a leading spokesman from each political party, it's Bob Neill's turn from the Conservative Party. Bob, thank you ever so much indeed for joining us today.
My pleasure. Happy to come along.
Now, Bob, first question is, should you be elected, what's the main plank of your manifesto? What would you do first?
Well, the first thing that we're committed to do are implementing our manifesto pledges. Key amongst those is working with councils to enable them to freeze the council tax for the first 2 years of a Conservative government, so that clearly is a top priority. Second, the removal of the top-down targets from the regional spatial strategies that we have promised. And then thirdly, in the local government and planning and housing bill that we have promised, in the first Queen's speech of a Conservative government, we'll be looking to tackle some key issues such as giving local authorities a power of general competence, removing the predetermination rule which prevents councillors speaking out on planning issues, setting in place the council tax incentive so that councillors will keep the proceeds from new development if they think it's appropriate in their area, both for homes and also for businesses, and also taking on board a thoroughgoing review of the funding formula, because we believe that that's not transparent, it's not easily understandable by even informed people, as we all know, and we think there's a real risk that it has been unfairly manipulated. So we want to have fair funding across the whole of the country, and to remove burdens on councils by abolishing things like the comprehensive area assessment and all the tick box regime that takes up so much time and money.
Now, Bob, we've asked our viewers to send in some questions, and here they go. Now, the first one is, people are very concerned, as you might imagine, with their salaries, and particularly with public sector pensions. What would you say to that?
Well, everybody knows that we're going to have to look very carefully at public spending, and it's foolish to pretend that any government of any kind isn't going to have to reduce expenditure. It's also foolish to pretend that you can't look at pensions, because that's been happening in the private sector just as elsewhere. What I can say to people is, obviously, we're not going to be treating local government pensions in isolation from the rest of the public sector, civil servants, members of Parliament for that matter as well. We all have, all of those things have to be looked at. We'll want to do that urgently. Because there's not been a comprehensive spending review, unfortunately, we need to have a look at the books. But equally, we've always made clear that you want to be sensitive to the position of people who are existing entrants of schemes, and again, that sort of reflects what's been happening elsewhere.
OK, Bob, now, next on the agenda is personalisation. Now, do you support personalisation? Would you drive it further, and how would you fund it?
Well, the key problem that we've got is not, I think, that the idea isn't a good one, but we do have a real concern that the government has seriously rushed it. And trying to bring the thing in October without adequate funding is going to be a real problem. So again, when we talk about having to have our first budget within 50 days, one of the key things that we're going to have to do is to sit down and see the figures that the government hasn't yet shown us, and to see how we can deal with that problem. I can't give any commitments beyond that until we have seen the books, but the fact that we obviously want to move in the direction of personalised care is well on record as far as we're concerned as a party. It's trying to do our best to sort out the mess of the handling of it by the outgoing government.
And finally, what about unitary authorities? There's been quite a drive for unitary authorities. What's your view on that?
We made clear in the manifesto that we won't proceed with any further forced amalgamations of authorities, and we will scrap the proposed restructuring in Norfolk and Devon and Suffolk. And that's because a lot of evidence now, works done by some of the academics, have shown, and in fact the financial case that was used to justify unitary structuring wasn't sound. In a lot of the unitaries we have seen the transition costs come in hugely over budget. There's also a real disruption to local services, and also in some cases where you're really significant reducing the number of councillors, there's a real concern about loss of democratic accountability and creating rather large remote authorities. What we'd do instead, rather than going down the unitary route, is do much more to encourage joint working between local authorities, sensible shared functions, shared service delivery models, shared commissioning. And I think that's the way forward for local government for the future.
Bob, thank you very much indeed for joining us today on the Local Government Channel.
Happy to do so. Nice to see you.